The world was a terrifying chaos of rushing water and echoing thunder. For a tiny scrap of fur, no bigger than a man's hand, the storm drain was a cold, dark prison. Rain fell in relentless sheets, pouring down the street and gushing into the grated opening, carrying with it leaves and grit that swirled around the kitten's trembling body. Every clap of thunder sounded like the sky itself was breaking apart. And the little creature huddled against the slick, grimy concrete wall, its fur plastered to its shivering frame. Fear was a constant, sharp presence, a feeling far too big for such a small body. It was so terribly alone, a minuscule being lost in a vast and angry world. The water level rose slowly, inch by terrifying inch, threatening to submerge the small patch of concrete where the kitten had found a precarious footing. It was a constant battle to keep its head above the swirling currents, its claws scrabbling for purchase on the slippery surface. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the brief, terrifying flashes of lightning that illuminated the grimy enclosed space for a split second. Kitten mews. With a final surge of desperate energy, the kitten let out another series of mews, louder this time, more insistent. Kitten cries. They travelled up through the iron grate, mingling with the sound of the rain lashing against the pavement. Faint kitten call. It was a faint signal, a tiny spark of life in the midst of the tempest, a call that floated on the wind, hoping against all odds that someone, somewhere, might hear it. The little one didn't know if anyone was out there, but it was the only thing it could do. It was Mrs. Higgins, on her way home from the village shop with a loaf of bread tucked under her arm, who first heard it. She paused, tilting her head, pulling her coat tighter against the driving rain. At first she thought it was just the wind whistling through the old oak trees that lined the street, but then she heard it again, a faint but unmistakable cry, a tiny plaintive sound that tugged at her heart. She peered around, her brow furrowed with concern. The street was empty, washed clean by the downpour. She walked slowly, listening intently, her practical errand completely forgotten. The meows grew a little stronger as she approached the storm drain on the corner of the lane. Bending down, despite the rain plastering her hair to her face, she put her ear close to the cold iron grate. There it was again, clearer this time, a desperate little mew from the darkness below. A wave of compassion washed over her. Some poor creature was trapped down there, cold and frightened. She straightened up, her mind racing. This was not something she could handle on her own. She needed help, and quickly. Without a second thought, she hurried to the nearest cottage. The one with the cheerful blue door belonging to Mr. Gable, a retired joiner known for his steady hands and kind nature. She rapped on the door urgently, and when he opened it, she explained the situation in a rush of words. Mr. Gable listened patiently, his calm demeanour a comforting presence. He nodded, grabbed his thickest waterproof jacket and a powerful torch from a hook by the door, and followed her back out into the relentless rain. The sound of a trapped animal was a call to action that no decent person in their small community would ever ignore. Soon, a small crowd had gathered. A young couple from down the road, hearing the commotion, came out to see if they could lend a hand. Another neighbour, Mr. Davies, arrived with a length of sturdy rope and a bucket. They stood together, a small circle of umbrellas and concerned faces, all focused on the iron grate and the faint, heart-wrenching cries that came from beneath it. The storm raged on around them, but within their small group there was a shared sense of purpose. They were united by a simple, powerful instinct, to save the helpless creature trapped in the dark below, no matter what it took. Mr. Gable, taking charge with a quiet authority, knelt by the drain, shining his powerful torch beam down through the grate. The light cut through the gloom, revealing the distressing scene below. There, huddled on a tiny ledge just above the swirling water, was a minuscule kitten. It blinked up at the sudden light, eyes wide with fear, then a flicker of hope. The sight spurred the small group into more urgent action. The water was rising. They had very little time. Every second was precious. The first challenge was the grate itself, heavy, solid cast iron set into concrete housing. Mr. Gable and Tom wedged a crowbar from Mr. Gable's toolkit into the edge. They strained together, muscles bunching under wet jackets. A loud, groaning screech of metal against stone, and the grate finally lifted, a moment of triumph, a direct path to the trapped animal. Now they could see the kitten clearly, shivering, a pathetic bundle of fluff, its desperate mews growing stronger as faces peered down. Now came the most delicate part. The drain was too narrow to climb down, the drop was several feet. Reaching the kitten required ingenuity and a gentle touch. Mrs. Higgins suggested the bucket. Mr. Davies nodded in agreement. He tied his rope to the bucket's handle, not secure. They would lower the bucket down, hoping the kitten would climb inside, their best and only chance to pull it from the cold, watery depths. With steady hands, Mr. Davies began to lower the bucket, guided by Mr. Gable's torch beam. He moved slowly, cautiously. The bucket swayed gently, landing softly on the ledge beside the kitten. The little animal stared at the strange new object in its dark prison. Then, sensing a vessel of hope, it took a hesitant step, another step, scrambled over the rim, and tumbled into the bottom of the bucket. A collective sigh of relief from the small crowd as the tiny miracle unfolded below. With the utmost care, Mr. Davies began to pull the rope, lifting the bucket smoothly and steadily out of the dark chasm. As it rose into the grey daylight, a tiny, whiskered face peeked over the edge, blinking at the blurry world of rain and concerned faces. Mrs. Higgins was ready, a thick, dry towel held open in her hands. The moment the bucket was on solid ground, she reached in and gently scooped up the shivering kitten. It was lighter than air, a fragile bundle of cold, wet fur and bone. She immediately wrapped it snugly in the soft towel, murmuring comforting words as she cradled it against her chest. The journey from the cold, wet street into the warmth of Mrs. Higgins's cottage was a short one, but for the kitten it was a passage into another world. The moment they stepped inside, the roar of the storm was replaced by the gentle tick-tock of a grandfather clock and the welcoming crackle of a fire in the hearth. The air was warm and smelled of dried lavender and baking bread. Mrs. Higgins wasted no time. She sat in her favourite armchair by the fire and began to gently rub the kitten with the towel, carefully drying its sodden fur and warming its chilled body. Once the kitten was mostly dry, its fur starting to fluff up into a soft halo, the next priority was food. She warmed a small saucer of milk, just a little, and added a tiny drop of cream to it, knowing that a starving creature needed nourishment but couldn't handle too much at once. She placed the saucer on the rug before the fire. The kitten, which had been watching her every move with wide, curious eyes, crept forward hesitantly. It sniffed at the milk, its little pink nose twitching, and then began to lap at it eagerly, the first proper meal it had likely ever had. After drinking its fill, the kitten's tiny body, now warm and with a full belly, was overcome with exhaustion. It stumbled a few steps and then curled up on a soft corner of the hearthrug, as close to the fire's warmth as it could get. Mrs. Higgins watched it, her heart swelling with a profound sense of tenderness. She gently stroked its back with one finger, and the kitten responded with a tiny, rumbling purr. It was a sound of pure contentment, a sign that the terror of the storm drain was already beginning to fade, replaced by an overwhelming feeling of security and comfort. The rain continued to patter against the window panes, but inside the cosy cottage the storm felt a world away. The kitten slept, its small body rising and falling with each peaceful breath. The constant shivering had ceased, replaced by the deep, restful slumber of a creature that had finally found sanctuary. Gone was the cold concrete, the terrifying rush of water. Here, there was only the soft rug, the gentle heat of the fire, the quiet, protective presence of the kind woman who had brought it in from the cold. Its tiny paws twitched occasionally, perhaps dreaming of its harrowing ordeal, but its sleep was deep and undisturbed. Mrs. Higgins sat in her armchair, her knitting lying forgotten in her lap, her gaze fixed on the small sleeping form. She had not planned on having a pet, but as she watched the kitten, a decision began to form in her heart. She couldn't imagine sending this little survivor back out into the uncertain world. It had been through so much already. This small, brave creature had fought so hard to live. It deserved a chance at a life filled with warmth, food, and affection. A soft smile touched her lips. Her quiet little cottage was about to become a little less quiet. As evening fell, the storm finally subsided, leaving behind a world washed clean and glistening under the emerging stars. Inside, the only sounds were the crackling fire and the kitten's faint, contented purrs. It stirred briefly, opened its eyes, looked up at Mrs. Higgins. There was no fear in its gaze now, only a look of calm trust. It stretched its tiny body, a gesture of complete relaxation, and then settled back down to sleep, burrowing its head into the soft wool of the rug. It was home. It was safe. This was its place now, a haven from all the storms the world could muster. The little grey and white kitten, once a terrified, forgotten soul lost in a dark drain, had found its forever home. It would never again know the chilling fear of being alone and cold. Its days would now be filled with sunbeams to chase, warm laps to sleep in, the gentle, loving hand of the person who had heard its desperate cries. The ordeal was over. A new life, full of promise and peace, had just begun. For the first time in its short life, the kitten was truly, deeply, and wonderfully safe, wrapped in the quiet comfort of a love it had only just discovered.